views and opinions expressed on Explorers Secrets of the Truth or that of their guests or contributors are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent. All information on Explorers Secrets of the Truth is provided in good faith. However, we make no representation or warranty of any kind, express or implied, regarding the accuracy, adequacy, validity, reliability, availability, or completeness of any information on this talk show or website.
From monsters and ghosts to otherworldly beings, join the explorers as they venture into the darkest realms, seeking the truth to what goes bump in the night.
There we have it.
Good evening and welcome to Explorers Seekers of the Truth, episode 50. Tonight, as always, I'm joined by my best friend and co-host, Les Sincavage. How are you doing tonight, Les?
I am fantastic, my friend. Thank you very much. And how are you, Giddy?
I just do a different voice every time I do the intro, so
it throws me off every time too.
I can't get to the end of it without I start laughing. And I don't know why.
Every time. Hey, Moon Joey's here.
Yeah. So I'm doing pretty good.
That's good.
A little busy this week, but doing pretty good.
Busy's better than not. I'm good. Like I said before, we're planning for a little event with the family, and we things are a little hectic. So
well,
but otherwise good.
Good. So let's tell everybody where they can reach us.
Yes, you can comment here live on Facebook or on YouTube, because you could watch us live on both platforms. You could find us on Twitter at Explorers Group, at our website, explorersgroup.com. And so if you comment under the show on YouTube or Facebook, we should be able to see it live. Hey, Paul, good to see you, buddy. So we see some comments rolling in now on Facebook. That's awesome. So feel free to interact. And at any time during the show, if you have a question or you want to interject with something, throw it up there. And as long as I see it, we'll try and put it up there and answer your question.
Okay, cool. So this evening's topic is Tales of American Vampires, and we'll journey back in time into several different parts of the country and discuss a few of the alleged cases of vampires in America.
This is a topic I can really sink my teeth into. Ooh, yeah. Sweet. Hey, OS, good to see you, buddy. Hey, Rick, thanks for joining in, guys.
Yep. So according to the predominant mythology, every vampire was once human, who after being bit by a vampire died and rose from the grave as a monster. Vampires crave the blood of the living, whom they hunt during the night. They use protruding fangs to puncture their victims' necks. And since they're reanimated corpses, they live their living remains of a deceased person. Vampires are often referred to as the undead. They still pass as healthy humans, however, and will walk undetected amongst the living. In fact, vampires may be attractive, highly sexual beings seducing their prey before feeding. A vampire may take the form of animals, usually a bat or a wolf, in order to sneak up on victims. Vampires are potentially immortal, but they do have a few weaknesses. They can be destroyed by stakes to the heart, fire, beheading, direct sunlight, and are very wary of crucifixes, holy water, and garlic. Vampires do not cast a reflection, and they have superhuman strength. That was just basic notes on the mythology of vampires. I just went to read that in.
So here's a question. Actually, Moon Joey has a question. How do vampires feel about mosquitoes? That's a good question. So it's
competition.
Like, what's that?
Competition.
Yes, that's true. And ticks. But vampires are referred to as the undead. So in a way, would they kind of be like zombies? Although like zombies need brains, or to feed off of another living host in order to survive or continue the zombie strain. And I guess like vampires are kind of the same way. because I mean, there's ways to kill zombies, like, you know, shot to the head or beheading or setting them on fire. Kind of similar if you think about it.
Yeah, very much so. You kind of, I guess, anything that's technically labeled the undead, a mummy,
Yeah, I
as
guess
you see it.
anything that once was living and then came back from the dead would kind of be on the same.
Yeah, because they all kind of
Even
have a similar
Frankenstein.
pattern.
Yeah. Even Frankenstein's monster, I should say, which was a combination of body parts from once living people, and, you know. So it's
Mm.
interesting how all the fabled or the famous monsters, you know, kind of have that similarity amongst them. But back to the vampires, the vampire figure with its peculiar combination of characteristics and governing rules is actually a fairly recent invention. Bram Stoker conceived it in his 1897 novel Dracula. Other authors reinterpreted Dracula in a number of plays, movies, and books. But while the specifics are new, most of the individual elements of the legend have deep roots, spanning many regions and cultures. In the next few sections, we'll look at some of the more notable vampire ancestors.
Yeah. So when you get to the history of vampiric figures, the first vampiric figures are legends that date back at least 4,000 years to the ancient Assyrians and even the Babylonians of Mesopotamia.
Hmm.
And when you get into the Mesopotamians feared Lamashtu,
Hmm.
which was a vicious demon goddess who preyed on humans. And in Assyrian legend, the Lamashtu is the daughter of the sky god Anu, who would creep into houses at night and steal or kill babies either in their crib or in the womb. Believers attributed sudden infant death syndrome miscarriages to the figure. Now, Lamashtu, which translates to the she who erases. I'm sorry, my Apple thing keeps popping up
That's all right.
right over the screen here. And so she who erases. Now she would also prey on um, adults, sucking the blood of young men and bringing diseases, sterility, nightmares. And she's often depicted with wings and a bird-like talons, and sometimes the head of a lion. In my research, I found several different depictions where she's got the head of a lion, talons, wings, just kind of different levels, interpretations over the years and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Now, to protect themselves from Lamashtu, pregnant women would wear an amulet depicting Pezozo, another evil god who once defeated the demon. Now, that demon in reference is the one they used for The Exorcist.
Oh, okay. That little gargoyle looking statue.
That's one depiction of him, yes.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
going further into the legend, at one point he's believed to be older than the abyss itself, and she was trying to get his power, so she became his lover, and then basically said to him, if you're so powerful and sure of yourself, tell me your real name.
Hmm.
And then tried to use it against him, but yet he was still strong enough to defeat her in the end.
Interesting. Hmm. Well, some prominent figures in some Jewish texts are accounts of Lilith. Of the accounts of Lilith vary considerably, but in the most notable versions of the story, she was the original woman. God created both Adam and Lilith from the earth, but there was soon trouble between them. Lilith refused to take a subservient position to Adam since she came from the same place he did. And in one ancient version of the legend, Lilith left Eden and began birthing her own children. God sent three angels to bring her back. And when she refused, they promised they would kill 100 of her children every day until she returned. Lilith, in turn, vowed to destroy human children. And accounts of Lilith as a child killer seem to be taken directly from the Lamashtu legend. She's often described as a winged demoness with sharp talons who came in the night, primarily. See, there's a pattern there with the talons and the wings and all that stuff, primarily to steal away infants and fetuses, same as what was that one, the Mesopotamians with the Lamashtu. So there's very, very similar in with the Jewish and the Mesopotamians. lore.
Mhm.
Let's see. So most likely the Jews assimilated the figure of Lammestu into their tradition, but it's also possible that both myths were inspired by a third figure. While she is often depicted as a terrifying creature, Lilith also had seductive qualities. The ancient Jews believed she would come to men at night as a succubus.
Yeah, it's even funny the names both start with an L, and actually the next one we're going to discuss in folklore also starts with an L.
Hmm.
So now
I
the
wonder if it has
ancient
like a similar Greek or a Latin basis or root term.
well, I wonder if it was just over the years that the legends just became misinterpreted or misheard at certain points, and the name just kind of ended up sticking over the years. Like each
Mhm.
group kind of went with this version of the name, or possibly a language translation from Hebrew, stuff like that. So now you get into the ancient Greeks, and they feared a similar creature, notably Lamu, which was a demoness with the head and torso of a woman, the lower body of a snake.
Hmm.
In one version of the legend, Lamu was Zeus's mortal lover. Filled with anger and jealousy, Zeus's wife, the goddess Hera, made Lamu insane. She would eat all her own children. And once she realized what she had done, she became angry and turned into an immortal monster, sucking the blood of young children mostly, and out of jealousy for their mothers.
Oof.
Now, there's also the Greeks also feared Empusu, Empusu. My good ancient Greek translations,
Mhm. That sounds
um, which was a malicious daughter of Hekarta, the goddess of witchcraft, who could change forms, came up from Hades at night as a beautiful woman. She would seduce shepherds in fields and then devour them.
right. Kind of
And
the Black Widow and the praying mantis kind of concept.
yeah, and then also in like Celtic folklore, the Burbanshee, not the Banshee, the Burbanshee,
Mhm.
would show up and would usually seduce young men. Ended up basically, they'd be found the next day with their basically almost mummified, like blood drained. So
Interesting.
this there's tons of um vampiric creatures in different mythology. Now you also had tradition in Asia, and in the Indian folklore, they describe a nightmarish character, the Rakshasa, which is a gargoyle-like shapeshifter who often preys on children, and the Vital, who are demons who could possess the recently dead and
Hmm.
wreak havoc on living.
That's interesting. They all of them have a similar concept, and it's almost like that whole kind of like with the Bigfoot, where it's like a story almost like to keep kids in line and don't go out in the dark or blah blah. Because it seems all the victims are children primarily, other than like shepherds, like when you go to the whole succubus thing. But it is weird how they're kind of targeting children and stuff, and they come out at night and they come out in the dark and don't go out in the dark. But and then in Chinese folklore too, corpses could sometimes rise from the grave and walk again. These Kiui were created as a person's Po, lower spirit, did not pass on to the afterlife at death, usually because the bad deeds during life. The Po, angered by its horrible fate, would reanimate the body and attack the living at night. One particularly vicious sort of Kaiui, known as the Kangxi or Changxi, could fly and take different forms. The Kangxi was covered in white fur, had glowing red eyes, and bit into its prey with sharp fangs.
Mm, made me
Again,
hungry.
kind of goes to that whole winged creature thing,
Mm.
Actually, Moon Joey has a couple comments there. One, vampire disadvantage: can't check your appearance in a mirror before you head out for the night for nightlife. That's true because they don't have a reflection. And did you know that those who self-identify as vampires even have their own organization in New Orleans known as the New Orleans Vampire Association, or NOVA. I actually saw a program on that organization and stuff like that. Now they have people that they could do bloodletting with, and you know, and actually when I was up in Salem years ago with uh, a group that we went around with, they were saying about how you don't go out alone late at night because there was a supposed vampire group or organization or whatever you want to call it, or what would you call a vampire group? That wouldn't be a coven, would it? That's like witches.
Trying to think. There's a term for it. I don't. No, I think it's coven also.
Yeah. So, well, we'll just say vampire coven.
Yeah.
Supposedly up in Salem, there was a bunch of vampires up there too, and they said there was a reporter that was trying to follow up on the case, and I guess she was new or whatever, and she was trying to get into it, and she was warned not to dig too far, and then she mysteriously disappeared because she was getting too much dirt and getting too close to, I guess, the heart of the coven or something. So interesting. I don't know if that was just part of the talking tour to make it interesting, or if it was true. I don't know, but still, nonetheless, it was interesting.
Well, yeah. And I mean, like, you kind of think about it, it almost goes back to some of these legends. You have these Nordic tribes that travel and spread the different vampire legends throughout Asia, Europe, and into the Middle East. And as the stories travel, you know, you get various elements combined to form new vampire myths and legends. But in the, say, the last 1100 years or so, vampire legends have, you know, especially been attributed to the Eastern European countries.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at these creatures and, you know, there's kind of the direct, what we think of as the direct predecessors of the modern vampire, the Bram Stoker vampire. So the case that piqued my interest was one from the spring of 1788 in Dillsboro, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard the story. I was working out the one night and I was listening to a program called Bedtime Stories. It's the American Vampires episode.
That is a great podcast.
Yeah, bedtime stories and wartime stories. If you're ever just looking to hear a story and not necessarily a podcast, it's just kind of like a scary story. They do some decent little animation in the background, nothing, you know, moving, just kind of some images and stuff. But that and wartime stories, it's the same channel. They just split into two different parts of it. So
yeah, you can find them on YouTube, right?
Yeah, on YouTube. If you type in bedtime stories, kind of like a black and white logo.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, I think, a skull or something like that. So
yeah, you turned me onto that channel. That's really cool stories.
Vampires of Dillsboro.
Ooh.
So, back to the vampires of Dillsboro. In the spring of 1788, a Dr. Alford and his family showed up in the small mountain community of Dillsboro, North Carolina, where they purchased land and built a fine home near the Tuckasegee River. The house was large, and the doctor set aside some of the first floor rooms for an office and apothecary. There were rumors that the Alfords were descendants from royalty, and townsfolk were happy to have another doctor in the community. All went well at first, but then two men who had been treated by Dr. Alford for gout suddenly passed away for unknown causes. Both were well-liked, productive members of the town, and many considered their deaths suspicious. However, the local minister managed to calm the hotheads and who were accusing the doctor of wrongdoing, explaining that tomorrow is promised to no man and anyone can die at any time in accordance with the will of God. So then normalcy returned to Dillsboro, and there were no further incidences until the fall, when the minister's wife entered their children's room and saw that what she described as a dark figure hovering over the young daughter, who had been in perfect health when she went to bed. The woman screamed, and other members of the household came running in, but the girl was dead. There were no obvious signs of illness or injury, other than a small amount of blood on the pillow from 2 puncture wounds on the child's throat.
I always love when they, in these stories where they say in perfect health in the 1700s. And I always just correlate that to, okay, you're breathing. You must be okay. Yeah. But something wasn't right in Dillsboro. at this time, somebody reported seeing a huge bat-like creature flying about one night, and they described it as an animal so large that it could not have been of this world. So, again, you're also in the 1700s, so you have this kind of, it's bigger than what we've seen recently, but not necessarily that.
And a
But,
lot of superstition back then too.
oh yeah,
Everything was like over exaggerated.
yeah. So at that point, people start locking their doors and windows. The families that lived in the area huddled together, afraid to leave their children in their rooms, so they would end up all sleeping in one room. But then there's a story that comes up a few nights later in the fall. A young boy came racing into town, knocking frantically at the door of his grandparents' home, and he insisted that something was attacking his mother and father in their house up the hill. So his grandfather summoned some of the neighbors, and a small group of men made their way to the house on the hill where they found the boy's parents and their 2 young daughters dead. There were puncture wounds on the neck of all 4 corpses. People in the nearby community were alerted, and over the next few days, the surrounding hills and valleys were thoroughly searched, but nothing was discovered. So now you go into, by February of 1798, residents began to relax somewhat, but continued to keep their children close, avoided going out at night after dark, and were able, finally they were able to kind of convince themselves that whoever or whatever had killed that family on the hill had moved on. Then one evening, screaming was heard coming from a house about halfway up the hill. And when the neighbors arrived, they saw a black form in the shape of a human race down the hill and disappear into the Alfords' home. The young couple who lived in the house were found dead with strange bite marks on their throats.
Interesting. And it goes on to say a vigilante group quickly formed and the men made their way to the Alford house. They pounded on the door and demanded to be let inside, but Dr. Alford refused. After a short discussion, it was decided that some of the men would stand guard outside the house while others fetched reinforcements. By morning, a large contingent of townsmen forced their way into the Alford house. Dr. Alford initially attempted to reason with the group, and he was dragged outside and tied to a tree. The upstairs chambers each contained beds, but even though it was early morning, the beds were freshly made and did not appear to have been occupied the previous night. After searching the downstairs, including the doctor's office and apothecary, they broke down a heavy locked door and descended the steps to the cellar. There they discovered 3 coffins. In one lay Mrs. Alford. She was dressed in black and very much alive. She hissed and cursed as she was pulled from the coffin. Excuse me. The couple's 15-year-old son was nowhere to be found.
So
that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, you have 2 out of the 3, and you also have something running towards their home and what appeared to enter into their home.
Right. So was it the doctor or the son?
Yeah, if the wife was already in the coffin for the day.
Right. And the doctor was in the house when they got there.
Yeah. So did the son hide somewhere, something like that? So the crowd that had gathered outside the Alfords' home and the designated vigilante group leader addressed them, insisting Alford, including their sons, were vile, unnatural creatures that fed on the blood of the living in order to sustain themselves. Now, Dr. and Mrs. Alford were hanged, and their corpses were placed inside the house, and the dwelling was set on fire. Now, the interesting thing is the attacks and murder ceased, but were they really vampires? Or had someone in Dillsborough recently heard of the attacks in Rhode Island, which began around the same time, and jumped to the conclusion that, this was another case of vampirism?
Yeah.
However, the deaths in Dillsborough differ from those in New England in that none of the New England deaths involved puncture marks or trauma to the neck, nor the actual drinking of blood. They were all basically attributed to wasting deaths. Now, so also you have the possibility that somebody in Dillsborough had read the 1748 German poem "The Vampire" by Heinrich August Ostenfelder.
Hmm.
So you already
Well,
have some mythology being put out there.
right. And a lot of the, like we were talking about earlier in the show, of all like the lore and legend throughout the old world, which then was brought to the new world as people started coming over and settling these areas, and especially throughout the South and like the Appalachian mountain chain. There's so much folklore of magic and monsters and creatures and ghosts and
Otherworldly
paranormal.
beings.
Yes, yeah, and all the things that go bump in the night, you know? So all that history and all that legend and lore comes over with it. So they could be drawing from that, to kind of throw a label onto, what has been going on. Or like you said, they read a report of what was going on up in New England and the wasting deaths. We're going to talk about that later then, right?
Yeah.
So, all right, I don't want to go into that anymore, but yeah, so it could have been just like, or maybe something else or someone else was taking advantage of a disease-stricken community and then traveled south and figured, he could start killing down there, point the blame on a certain family that was already kind of thought of as weird, and you know what I mean? Uh,
Yeah. The only
Wrongly accused them.
the only weird thing is the whole like if they really found the wife in a sealed off area of the house in a coffin.
Yeah, yeah. I
Like
mean, if that is actually true, that's bizarre.
yeah. But then also like the son is never found.
Yeah.
Like you have a third member of the family who basically at some point disappears. Like there's
Right.
never a reference to like back then you got to think like if you're going to move, you know, how far do you move away?
Right.
Like it's not like nowadays where you're in Pennsylvania, I'm in Virginia, we can do this and we're talking to people all over the
Yeah.
world.
Right.
You
Instantly. Yeah.
you might be able to, the next town might be 20 or 30 miles away at that point, and it might only be 6 people. you
Yeah.
know,
I mean, look back in the early days from Origsburg to Allentown. They were the only two closest towns next to each other, for a while there. So I mean, that's
yeah.
by car, that's like a half hour, 40-minute drive.
Mhm.
Back then it would have been half a day or more to get there. So
Yeah.
you're right. You're right. And I mean, also look at this in the kind of same light as the Salem witch trials. It started out with this, these kids or these girls that were having these fits, and then they're like, oh, we're getting some attention from this, and oh, it was this person's wife who was doing, said thing, and the blame is there. So then, all right, this mass hysteria starts, and now it's like, okay, well, we're going to put this thing to bed, and we're gonna, hang so and so or kill these people. And it's not until it starts getting up into the higher or the more well-to-do members of that society where it's like, okay, well, we better take a few steps back and start reevaluating this now,
Mhm.
after how many people had already been hung and crushed.
Yeah. Well, and also one of the things is, and something I had kind of seen referenced in the research to put this together was this is after the height of the witch trials in Europe and in the Americas, really.
Mhm.
So you have this like next boogeyman.
Right, right.
You have legends and lore that as we've went through here go back to several different cultures. You have a very heavy, you know, English, German, Welsh, Dutch
Mhm.
grouping. So you have these, ingrained folklore. You go from the witches to, hey, what's the next scary thing? And
Right.
you start to have strange deaths in a town, like two people being treated for gout. I have gout. It sucks, but
Yeah.
I would never picture dying from it necessarily. But here's the thing, we're also taking a 1700s
point of view.
diagnosis of gout.
Right,
Could just have something different. And what was the life expectancy back then? Day to day, how many people would, like I said, 1700s definition of, oh, you're in perfect health. You're breathing.
Right.
Internal
Common
medicine.
cold, we're taking people out in
Yeah.
large numbers back then.
Mhm. Yeah, so you have that kind of thought process. You don't have, you're taking bits and pieces of story. Some people say like the big winged bat like creature. Well, you think about some of the legendary stuff that we've attributed to vampirism is winged creatures that are
Mhm.
larger than normal with different features. You get into other folklore, off topic, but like the Mothman,
Mhm.
winged creature, winged humanoids, all these different over the years, these creatures pop up in places. So is it just folklore? Is it maybe the doctor accidentally did kill two people?
Yeah.
Treatment, bloodletting and different things like that back then were accepted medical practices. So, did he screw something like that up? Did he give them the wrong medication? Did somebody have an allergic reaction?
Mhm.
Now you get to the deaths where people have puncture marks on their neck. That's a little harder to attribute to something, but spiders,
Yep.
snakes,
Well, like you said, it could have been bloodletting, or because I mean that was a common practice, like you said. I mean, and then they would use leeches and stuff like that where they would leave marks. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So could have been, some sort of like I said before, you had a lot of that folk uh medicine and folk lore and stuff that came over with a lot of that. And you have certain religious groups that some of that was taboo. You know what I mean? Depending on what part of the old country you came from. If you were in like the rural areas, you had a lot of that folk medicine or traditional medicine kind of stuff, nature based. Whereas some of the religious groups would probably be not necessarily science medicine based, but more, I guess, more along those lines where it would have some sort of a practice. You would have a doctor that would have, a certain way of doing things, and that's what you thought or know of what needs to be done. But, like I said, if you start using leeches to try to help alleviate something, some pains or pressures or something, and it was something worse, like you said, and they ended up passing from it, but they saw those marks, so then the monster stories start.
Yeah. And even in some religious groups, the belief in the Storgi and stuff like that would actually be reasons to be excommunicated from the church.
Right.
So you get this, push-pull thing going on between religion, folklore, the possibility that maybe these people were mentally ill even, and
Right.
or maybe the guy wasn't really even a doctor. There's no definitive to try to go back and find records from the 1700s from a school that says Alfred graduated top of his class and as a doctor. It's non-existent. So you could have just had a family of people who were maybe thrill killers or just mentally ill, or you just had random deaths that get attributed to the new people, like the people who don't necessarily fit in this town or aren't from this town.
True. Yeah, drifters or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah, you never know. And like it's to your point. It was so long ago. You're not going to find a lot of, record about it. But
Mhm.
I do want to say hi to Norm and Joe. They all joined in here tonight too. So thanks for joining in, guys. Good to see you. Should we jump on to the next one?
Yeah, I think we've kind of beaten a dead horse on that one.
Beating the undead horse.
Yep.
All All right, the next case is the above mentioned New England, like we were talking about with the wasting deaths. Vampires of New England Sounder. One of the earliest known cases of New England. Oh, there we go. There we go. I wasn't supposed to read that line. Didn't see that note.
Put that
One of
cue
the
in there for no reason.
yeah, and then I read it out loud. Yeah. One of the earliest known cases of New England vampirism to have a name attached to it was that of Rachel Harris, who died of tuberculosis in 1790. Again, right around the same time frame within, 30, 40, 50 years. Um, the year after her death, her widower, Captain Isaac Burton, married her stepsister, Huldah. Before long, Huldah began exhibiting symptoms similar to Rachel's, and family and friends therefore reasoned that Rachel was the culprit. In February 1793, more than 500 Manchester residents braved frigid temperatures to watch the liver, heart, and lungs be removed from Rachel's exhumed corpse and burned on a blacksmith's forge. According to some versions of the tale, portions of the organs were preserved to make a medicine for Huldah. Regardless, she died that September. Following her death, did the good people of Manchester realize the error of their ways? Sort of. They reasoned that perhaps Rachel hadn't been a vampire at all, but rather a witch. So trading one monster for another.
Mhm. Yeah, and when you think about that, in some of the European folklore, when it comes to warding off vampires or people who feel like they've been bitten but haven't turned yet, one of the practices was to bathe in the blood of a vampire, to, carry parts of their body with them. So,
Mhm.
This whole thought process of them making some kind of medicine out of this. But also, when you deal with tuberculosis, you're taking something that was ridden with the disease and giving it to somebody else. So basically,
Yeah, yeah.
just
Literally.
super,
Inject.
you're super transferring the tuberculosis. to them.
That is a direct transfer for sure. And actually, this story, or one very, very similar to it, speaking of lore, those of you who have Amazon Prime, look up the show Lore, Lore. It's all different kinds of stories. One in particular of the New England vampires and stuff. They have a lot of tales about that. It's really, really cool. So check that out.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to throw that in there.
Now, also sometimes, like with some of these legends, like they say, like the frigid temperatures.
Mhm.
A lot of times, bodies are kind of, oh, the body didn't decompose or hasn't
Right.
started to decompose, or it's puffed up, which is usually just the fact that embalming practices back then were not the greatest or non-existent in most
Yeah,
areas.
or rigor mortis.
Mhm. But a lot of times when they say about the body's not decomposing, like in this story, they don't really mention it, but they say about the frigid temperatures.
Mhm.
Sometimes the environments where these bodies are put are cold enough to basically not allow the processes to start because the body is stayed chilled for long
Right.
periods of time. So that's also one of those things when they start saying, "Oh, the body didn't decompose." It's like, well, yeah, because it's 20 degrees outside.
Right. Well, yeah, the body still looks fresh. She gets up at night and wanders. She's not decomposing. Yeah, but she's
So
just preserved.
yeah, you're basically, and also you see in some of those like other, like the Icemen and stuff like that that they find, or the woolly mammoths, or
Mhm.
different mummies and stuff they find. Well, it's because the environment where they're laid, you
Mhm.
know, they lack certain things that cause decomposition. So the environments basically preserve the bodies or change the process of decomposition to mummify.
Right, and like those bodies, the peat bodies, like in the
Mhm.
peat bogs,
Yep.
they look like they just died days ago.
Yeah.
You
And it's
know.
just because of the environmental factors that basically mummify them almost, lifelike in that sense.
Right.
So now you have another story that comes out of New England. It's Sarah Tillegas, who comes out of the Exeter, Rhode Island area. and she was the first of the snuffy Tildagast's 14 children to die, and she survived. His children survived, claimed that his children that survived had claimed Sarah continued to visit them at night. It might have seemed part of a natural grieving process, but by 1799, 5 more of the Tildagast children had died of consumption, and another was gravely ill. When the body of the dead were exhumed, all except Sarah were found to be in advanced stages of decomposition. Her heart was removed and burned in front of the family's home. It was described decades later in the 1888 writings of Sidney Ryder, observed the then peace and calm to the afflicted family, but not, however, until a 7th victim had been died. So with wasting disease, tuberculosis, it's highly contagious at certain points.
Right.
These people are coughing, which is pushing the tuberculosis into the air. You got to figure these houses were not the most well ventilated. They weren't cleaned. So you have 14 kids, 7 of them die, which probably back then was about average.
Yeah, and a lot of those kids slept in the same beds together. Some of them would be 2, 3, 4 kids in one bed.
Yeah, or even you might have 2, 3 kids in one bed, but their siblings are also sharing the room in another bed, or the communal living like that. So you're basically just pushing that the tuberculosis around the family.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not one of those things where, oh, this is so weird that they. Okay. Moon Joey had pointed out that the victims who had died in Colorado of tuberculosis couldn't be buried during the winter because the ground is too hard.
Right.
So you have some of these bodies. Well, and I know there's some paranormal locations where they used parts of buildings as like makeshift morgues because the ground was frozen too hard to bury people at that time of year. So you definitely have that kind of stuff. Now, her body, out of all the siblings' bodies, wasn't decomposing.
Yeah, which I thought that was a little weird. So all the other ones decomposed and started going through the natural phases of death, but hers didn't. So what would make hers so different from the rest? Now, did she die earlier in the heart of the winter? So she kind of stayed more preserved for a longer period of time, and then they died later, and then they got warmer and they all started decomposing faster, or
Well, yeah, that could be. Also, like, now it doesn't really say, was this like a crypt burial where it's dug into the ground somewhat and she's on a lower piece of the crypt, so her body temperature is staying cooler. The ones that
it's
are up
holding off the
higher,
bacteria.
heat rises. So if they're higher up on the I guess shelves or whatever, they're decomposing quicker. Her body is lower and it's being preserved by the lower, cooler temperatures at the bottom.
Yeah.
Or was she a vampire? I mean, her siblings said they keep seeing her. So
Yep. And actually, Moon Joe, you might be able to answer this for me. I know with a lot of these cases in New England, and on the eastern coast, the people that had tuberculosis were going to Colorado to these I can't remember the name of it, and if you know it, Moon Joey, please post it. But there was a place out in Colorado with a natural spring, and like because of the fresh mountain air and stuff like that, a lot of people were being sent out there to kind of recuperate and recover. And I know in one of the stories from New England, there was a father who's kind of the similar situation. The mom died, the one daughter died, then the son married a girl and she died of consumption, and then he ended up marrying the sister, and then he got consumption. Then he got sent out to Colorado, and I don't think she went with him. But then when he came back, she ended up having it, and then he ended up getting it again, and they died from. So the only one left out of the whole family was the father. But there was this place that everybody was going to in Colorado to kind of get over the consumption. A lot of people did survive because of the clean air and the natural springs and stuff like that. Manitou Springs, Colorado. Yeah, so you live nearby. That's pretty cool. Thank you, Moon Joey. Yeah, so that's where they were going, is that Manitou Springs in Colorado, where everybody was being sent to be cured. But what was the place down south? One of the hospitals, not St. Albans. I don't think it's.
In Kentucky, Waverly.
Yeah,
A big
yeah,
bathroom
that's it.
thing?
Yeah, with the
Yeah.
big tuberculosis place.
Yeah, they had the big open window like rooms and stuff like that. For the
Yeah,
airflow and all
yeah.
that.
Where they had the kids there, yeah, in the
Mhm.
upper area where they could go outside and play. Yeah.
Well, you also have up there on like in New York City on Roosevelt Island, there was a tuberculosis and typhoid and all that hospital in the city
Right.
because it was they containment of stuff like that was easier to put them in one place.
Right.
'Cause, I mean, well, they're Waverly, they were like cutting people's lungs out and breaking ribs and stuff like that, trying to
Yeah, real
ease.
sick
I-
stuff.
Well, lack of knowledge. I mean, they were really trying to help people. It's just the practice of medicine again. Like we're saying, like you go back to the 1700s. Oh, you're breathing. You're perfectly healthy. Keep going.
Right.
Yeah. And
Next.
here's the thing, like they always say that like perfectly healthy or in great in fine health, and it's like, yeah, people would die within 2 or 3 days of stubbing their toe back then.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It wasn't like nowadays where, yeah, I cut off my arm and yeah, they reattached it and it kind of works pretty well. And I've been pretty functional since, it's taken a few months to recover. Back then you got a splinter and you had to worry about getting some kind of infection and, dying.
Yeah, well, anything could have got, and it was the simplest things because that was even pre-penicillin.
Yeah. Yeah. I think penicillin was a post Civil War.
Or right around the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even
Yeah, I think it was the butt end of the Civil War where it was coming into more common practice.
Yeah. And I mean, even if you look there, like a lot of times, like you go back to Civil War medicine, it wasn't the bullet that necessarily killed the person. It was the post-operative infections because the bullet traveled through the air, through a tree, through somebody's clothes that they had been wearing for 3 years, not laundered. So back then you had the, hey, I got a splinter, but that splinter came off of a tree that was
contaminated.
Yeah, had somebody had just coughed on or animal feces on it or something like that, and all of a sudden the infection sets in, and they were healthy yesterday, and within 3 days they had passed away. It's always like 3 days in these stories too. Like they made it a whole 3 days before dying, and it's like, okay, like why is it always 3 days? Like
Yeah.
Nobody went 2 days, nobody went 1 day, nobody like, hey, 3 days, 4 days, on the 6th
Well, it's kind of always attributed to the sign of the Holy Trinity, right? Like the 3 scratches and all that crap, Well, not crap, but all that.
Yeah, 3 knocks on the door,
Do you want to do we want to cover the vampire superstition in Pennsylvania? We still have about 10 minutes.
Yeah, let's so just bring it back home for most of the people listening that Les and I pretty much are from PA area. So in a paper I recently read, there was the New York Folklore Society had written, Mr. Lee J. Vance had written this curious story of vampire superstitions among Hungarian miners in Pennsylvania. One of these miners at Les, you know the name of that town?
Antrim?
Antrim? Where is that? Do you know?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay, neither do I. Who was suffering from consumption conceived the idea that his suffocation and shortness of breath was caused by the ghost of a former boss who in life had um, basically been a tyrannical boss and over them in the mines, sitting on his breast and sucking his lifeblood. In Hungary, ghosts who thus prey on the living are exorcised by burning the hearts which beat in the bodies they inhabited before death. Proof that the body is that of a vampire is a heart still fresh and full of blood, when the rest of the corpse may be decayed. When a heart which is thus proved to be that of a vampire is burned, the living person who has been the ghost victim recovers from the effects and of their visitations. So basically, believing all this, the miners, aided by his brother, dug up the corpse of his dead boss, cut out the heart. It was found to be fresh and full of blood, as they expected, and they accordingly burned it with full faith and that good results would follow to the sufferer of consumption. The immediate result was arrest for the distirring of a corpse, and they were not prosecuted. However, allowance was being made for the ignorance. In spite of the burning of the boss's heart, the consumptive miner, although he professed at first to feel perfectly well, died not long afterwards. Sorry.
And again, it goes back to those old world European folklore. You know what I mean? With the you have to burn and make a tincture or some sort of a concoction out of the burnt remains of the hearts or internal organs, and you yourself have to consume it in order to rid yourself or protect yourself from this, vampiric, disease, for lack of better terms, or infection or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, really, it's kind of an infection, a disease. Yeah, when you think
Yeah,
about
it
it,
gets in the bloodstream, right?
yeah, and it's due to being bitten, so yeah, like now I've heard several times about this whole now, not even Hungarian. I just heard this in other historical accounts of vampirism, of bodies being found with blood in the chest cavity or in the heart and in the chest cavity. I don't know if that has something to do again with how bodies were prepared back then. The way they were laid. If they didn't drain bodies back then, certain things, certain cavities may hold some blood in them, long after other parts have kind of, either pushed out or the blood has, degraded so much. So I have heard
Well, isn't
other accounts.
TB and consumption itself is a lung infection, and it's with the bursting of the capillaries in the lungs and all that stuff, and the blood getting into the lungs, and you're basically drowning
Yeah.
of your own fluids. So
Mhm.
that would explain why everything looks like it's so full of blood.
Yeah.
Because of the
Also,
disease itself.
yeah, some of these people who do eventually die, like, did they really actually drain their lungs? Like, what was the embalming procedure for back then? Or
True.
even you got into more modern times and you hear accounts of this. Well, the person had tuberculosis. You took them to the funeral home. The funeral people are like, "Oh yeah, we took care of them. They never touched them. They kept them somewhere away from them. They rolled the body in." They don't, not knowing how things were transferred or how the contagion worked. They were just kind of relying on superstition.
Right.
I put garlic in the room, it'll keep away the vampire. And because even in other legends on and vampirism, it's not just garlic; it's anything with a pungent smell. Garlic kind of became the Bram Stoker modern vampire tale, but it was anything that was pungent they would use.
Yeah, because of the vampire's heightened senses and whatnot.
And if you think about it, like even like the crucifix and all that kind of stuff, that's more of a modern thing, because if you think about Lama stew and stuff like that, these are predating Christianity, Judaism. So
Yep.
why would a cross have
Have
any
any
effect?
kind of effect.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I looked it up, and Antrim is actually between Wellsboro and Williamsport in Tioga County. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, I honestly never heard of that town. Antrim.
I never did either. I don't know much of like the north central part of the state, to be honest with you.
I know Tioga County because that's where everybody used to go hunting, but I've never.
Yeah, and the PA Grand Canyon is up there.
Yeah, you can tell me that. I don't know.
Yeah.
If it didn't happen in my side of the state or the southern part of PA and into Pittsburgh, I really don't know much about it.
Yeah, it didn't happen. It didn't happen at all.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
well, that pretty much wraps everything up.
Yeah.
For the most part. We're 9:26. We're hitting the top of the hour here.
that's
So.
actually the middle of the hour.
Well, yes, the middle. Well, the top of our hour show,
Or the bottom.
end of it. I guess the bottom of the hour. You know what I mean. So, yeah. So that wraps up all of our notes and a lot of the, I guess, folklore that came across the pond into the southern. Well, actually, the eastern United States, because that was the more heavily populated area during those times. And it's still funny how pre-medicine superstitions took hold so quick and so deep in a lot of these communities, and it's all, most of them are all, here's the problem, and then they throw religion into it, then superstition gets into it, then it's a defiance of God, or it's a demon, it's a boogeyman of some sort, whether it be a vampire, a witch, or
werewolf,
something paranormal, werewolf. Yeah. Like looking in France, the Beast of Gavadon or whatever it is, same concept, and even with Dogman and stuff like that, like the Michigan Dogman and stuff like that, you had a lot of those immigrant people that came in, and a lot of them coming in around that time had like the whole werewolf craze that was going on over in the old world. There it comes over here, and all of a sudden there's all these sightings of dogmen and werewolf-like creatures.
Well, yeah, and you think about it, like there you have Native American folklore mixing with European folklore. It goes from our European ancestry of werewolf to dogman, which
Skinwalker.
You get these combinations of folklore being centralized in one area, and now you look at it and it's it's a whole different being from the original, but it's take a little column A, take a little column B, sprinkle them together, and now you have the new boogeyman for your region.
Exactly.
And I mean, these vampire stories were just a few. I mean, there was a lot more in New England. A lot of it is, though, as you saw the last couple of stories, all tie back to consumption.
Yeah.
So you had
an unknown illness at the time.
Yeah. You're working off an unknown. Live in a mountain because the air is better quality. Live in the desert because the air is drier and it'll help you breathe better. Airflow, no airflow. Clover. Smell this, burn that. You end up with a lot of different hokum to solve stuff, and some of it does help, some of it doesn't, and you end up with these weird one-off stories. And I guess because I always think about the Bram Stoker Dracula, it's like, oh, this person comes back from the dead, or they're claimed to have come back from the dead, and their body isn't decomposing the way the other bodies in their area are. But there's no other, there's no vampire, now when you went to Dillsboro, it was like there was people dying.
And then there was the shadow.
Yeah. What happened to those people? Did they become vampires?
Right.
Just
that predated Bram Stoker by like what 100 years.
Yeah. Yeah, his was 18 something that he wrote that book, or it started in the 1800s. I think it was finalized in like 1900 or something. But yeah, you have, like, I guess the thought process is, well, where are the rest of the vampires then? Also, where did
Right.
the Alfred's son go? Like, is he in New Orleans yet? Like, modern day, is he walking around like, I got away with
Yep.
that and I'm still
Yep.
doing this, and I've started my own little cult, and some of these people are real, some of these people are just, you know, living the facade of being a vampire, and that's how we stay hidden, in the shadows, which is
Right. Because a great show and movie. But that's a good point. So you have these pretenders,
mhm,
so to speak. You know what I mean? Like the people who are more or less into the fantasy
yeah,
of, you know, and that's what you see on the surface as, okay, so this is what a real vampire is, so that's kind of the facade,
yeah,
right? But behind that, in in the shadows, is where the true creatures lie, you
mhm,
know,
yeah,
or at
yeah,
least I would like to imagine it would be that way,
yeah.
you know.
Well, I mean, there's a reason why we have myths and legends.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean they're, myths and legends are not untrue. They just don't necessarily fit into this established norm of
Right, or haven't
society.
been proven to be normal,
Yeah.
yeah, yet, yeah.
So,
I tell you what, that's one place I would love to visit is New Orleans, although I am kinda scared because I'm a superstitious person, and I would love to check it out. I think that's one place that we should hit if we could
mhm,
ever get a chance to do like a the show on the road kinda thing, is
yeah.
hit up down there and do a show down there. That's another show I would really like to cover too, even before we go down there, is some of the, American vampires and specifically target New Orleans. So
Mhm.
that's, part of Moon Joey's point there is, you could do a lot on that. So,
Oh,
all
yeah.
right. That being said, we are past 9:30. We're past our hour. So I want to wrap this up. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and your participation again, as always, is awesome. We greatly appreciate it. And Norm, thank you for the kind words. And everybody else, again, thanks for joining in. Chad, thank you, my friend, for putting the show together and
Oh,
for joining me.
yeah. Well, thank you, and thank you guys again. Also, you know, it's very fun to interact and, kind of throw some ideas up there, like we were talking last episode, and it's always a good time. So, we
Mhm.
will be back in
2 weeks.
2 weeks doing
Yep.
another show. I think we're
Mini
looking at
monster.
mini monsters
Many monsters of North America.
of North America. Only
Yeah,
North America. We do not tolerate any non-North American mini monsters.
yeah. Non-American monsters are no for this show. So it's mini monsters of North America. So again, Chad, thank you. Everybody, thank you.
Yep. Thank you
Good night.
guys. Have a great night.
See you later.